Okay, this is Flip 21. It is an optional review for the test. I'm going to do this very quickly. You might want to slow the tape down or put the closed captions on or pause frequently. The before and after the Exile section of the test, you just have to have read the Flip section and you should do fine on that. True, false, as long as you've watched the different videos and paid attention in class, you should be fine as well. I'm going to use this as my framework to talk about a lot of different things. First, let's go through some vocabulary that will be on the test. Polytheism, we talked about the shift that Abraham made away from polytheism and towards monotheism. He probably did not believe in the existence of one God, and it's pretty clear that the Israelites worshipped Yahweh, but they also worshipped lots of other gods as well. It's not until the exile that we see the first clear signs that the Israelites are monotheistic. That's in 2nd Isaiah. And so there's a shift going on as the Israelites go off into different lands. As they make that shift, they also shift their perspective on God's attitude towards humans. If one believes in one God or worships one particular God, it's pretty easy to say that is our God, and our God likes us, and our God hates you, and my God's bigger than your God. And that principle that God only likes, or God should only like one group of people because of their race or ethnicity or religion or denomination, is what we would call nationalism in a theological sense. And when the Israelites come to the realization that there is only one God, that shifts their perspective on that God's love for all people. If there is only one God, that God created all people, that God is empowered to judge all people, and maybe, and this is a later development, God loves all people, even those who live on other sides of borders or who have different colored skin or who worship at a different church than we do. So again, there's a shift, and the exile seems to be one of the moving factors behind that. Also want to talk about the word diaspora. It means dispersion or scattering. The Israelites are sent into exile by the Assyrians, the people of Judah into exile by the Babylonians. Some of the Jews go down to Egypt to flee from the Babylonians. Some Jews stay in Persia after they're allowed to return. And the movement of the Jewish people outside of the Promised Land, the diaspora, is one of the things that helps shift their understanding of God. If we can go into exile and God is here with us in exile, then maybe we move away from this idea that God lives in Jerusalem or God lives in Judah, and we move away from this idea that God is only our God or God only loves us. Pre-exilic, post-exilic are important terms that I use over and over again. The changes that take place in Judaism before they go into exile and after they go into exile and come back from exile. So pre-exilic Judaism tends to be focused more on worship in the temple and Yahweh is our God. As the Jews move into exile and after the destruction of the temple in 587, a new place of worship becomes important in Judaism. The idea of a synagogue, a place where you gather and you pray and you chant psalms and you focus on studying the Torah and being faithful to God's covenant. Theodicy, not to be confused with words like theology and theocracy and theophany. Theophany is a dramatic showing of God, fire, thunder, lightning. Theology is the study of God. A theocracy is a government ruled by God, which is the perspective we have in the Bible, where the prophets keep the kings and the people in place. But theodicy is the idea that God is just, God is fair. And the ancient Israelites' idea of God's fairness was that God would reward good people in this lifetime, make them prosperous, keep them healthy, give them children. And again, as they go into exile and kind of look around and say, we've been faithful to the covenant, yet God has let this happen to us, the idea emerges that God's judgment might not come until the end of time. That after some point, all these different empires will come to an end, and God will bring about a new kingdom that will establish justice forever. and that maybe even judgment comes at the end of our lifetime. Along with that idea of eschatological judgment is the word apocalyptic. It's a type of literature that emerges during times of persecution. The book of Revelation written when the Christians are being persecuted, the book of Daniel being written during the Greek period. And apocalyptic literature literally means revelation, and it's a revelation about the end of time, that in general, at the end of time, God wins, and all those on God's side win. And apocalyptic literature uses dramatic visions and dreams and symbolism to communicate its message. Hellenization is the principle of the Greeks trying to impose their language and culture on the people they conquered. That's one of the reasons why this idea of judgment at the end of time emerging is the good Jews are being tortured and executed, and those who are apostates have turned away from God, and where's the justice in that? So these things contribute to the development of theological ideas. Women, not a lot of women on this test. There's Orpah, Ruth, and Naomi. Naomi is from Bethlehem. Her husband and sons die. She is left with her 2 daughters-in-law who are Moabite women. Both want to go with her to Bethlehem and serve her and take care of her. She tells them to stay home. Orpah does stay home. Oprah is named after Orpah. And Ruth says, I'm going to go ahead and go with you, even if it means working in the fields. And so the beautiful story of faithfulness, where Ruth then becomes the ancestor of King David. Jezebel, to the contrary, is this really, really horrible woman married to King Ahab, who promotes Baal worship, who persecutes Israel's prophets, who writes letters so that her husband's enemy will be assassinated and he can take his land. Athaliah is actually the sister of King Ahab, and when her son is killed, she kills off all the little boys who are potential heirs to the throne and becomes the ruler of Judah, the only woman to rule either tribe by herself or either nation by herself. Awful woman. There is a prince who is saved, and when he is crowned king, Athaliah is assassinated. Jezebel meets a really horrible end, being tossed out a window, run over by a chariot, and then eaten by dogs. On the more positive end, however, we have Huldah, who is a prophetess, a woman prophet, who Josiah consults when the book of the law is found in the temple. And she's the one who's called upon to interpret the book and says, hey, we need to reform things or God is going to punish us. And so an example of prophets working positively with the king, in this case a prophetess, versus Jezebel, where Elijah says that the dogs are going to lick up her blood. The story of Susanna is in the end of the book of Daniel, and she's a beautiful woman who is lusted after by some dirty old men. She refuses to give in to them, and they make accusations by her, and she's going to be put to death until she is rescued by Daniel. And I'll spend about a half a class period talking about stereotypes of women in the Bible, and Susanna fits into a couple of them. Her beauty is central to the story, and her main feature in the story is that she is a damsel in distress who needs to be rescued. Esther and Judith are much stronger women characters. They still suffer from some of the stereotypes as well, notably beauty. But they are not on the test because I did not have enough time. Men, not sure why this yellow square keeps on appearing. The men that we covered are all these right here. We've got Job, whose story is kind of timeless, placed back in the time of Abraham. Really, really good guy. Really, really horrible stuff happens to him. A dialogue about the nature of God's justice or theodicy. Ahab is a really, really evil king in the north. He's seen as the reason why God decided to destroy the north. And Elijah is the prophet who comes into conflict with Ahab and Jezebel. Story of Jonah, probably fictional, of a prophet who is called to preach to Assyria and get the people of Nineveh to repent so God won't destroy them. Beautiful story of God's love of all people, but probably didn't happen. We'll talk about Jonah later on Monday. Hezekiah is a good king in the south who listens to his prophet Isaiah, an example of a positive prophet-king relationship versus Ahab and Elijah's negative relationship. Hezekiah is also the one who built a water tunnel that probably helped the Israelites survive the Assyrian invasion. The story of Daniel and his friends in exile, probably written later during the Greek period, but Daniel and his friends continuously stay faithful to the covenant, and they are saved from the flames of a furnace. They're saved from lions. They are saved by God. Ezra and Nehemiah, we spent a class day on distinguishing their contributions to the restoration of Judah and Jerusalem after the exile, and we will also spend part of a class period talking about Judas Maccabeus and the Jews who revolted against the Greeks. Second Isaiah, some of you did an optional quiz on that, is writing during the exile. Religious and political groups. Samaritans were the people brought in by the Assyrians who adopted the Israelites' religion and became hated by the Jews and who hated the Jews in return. The Sadducees were a group who existed in the time of Jesus whose outlook was much more pre-exilic, temple worship, holocausts, temporal judgment. The Pharisees, also a group in the time of Jesus, were a much more post-exilic kind of Jewish group, focus on the synagogue, focus on the Torah, focus on eschatological judgment. Scribes emerged as important leaders in the diaspora, people who could read and write and interpret the law. During the Greek period of Hellenization, there were Jews who renounced their faith, the apostates. There were Jews who were willing to die for their faith, the martyrs. And there were Jews who were willing to kill for their faith, the zealots. Also the name of a group in first century Palestine. The Essenes were a group of Jews in the time of Jesus who ritually cleansed and baptized themselves. They thought the end of the world was coming because everybody was corrupt. The Sanhedrin was a Jewish senate which put Jesus on trial and convicted him of blasphemy. And the Sanhedrin, interestingly, is made up of the Sadducees and Pharisees who don't particularly like each other, but neither group seems to like Jesus very much. There was a flip assignment, flip number 20, that described the geography of the time of Jesus, and not just the physical geography in the time of Jesus, but the relationships between the different areas and why these different places were important during the public ministry of Jesus. And as we move into the Gospels, you need to know this map. The religious and political groups, by the way, were in flip number 19. So hopefully you have taken care of that. There are some extra credit prophet assignments that are floating around. Some of them were in this unit. Some of them I will offer next unit. And this is just placing the different prophets on the timeline of Israel's history to give you a perspective of when their writing takes place or when their story takes place. And that should do it. So good luck to you. Flip 21.5 gives you a link to a video on the TV program Nova. And the last half hour of it I thought was excellent for reinforcing some ideas that I have taught for years. And I just saw it this year, 2017, and was really impressed by it. And you could watch the whole thing, but I think the last half hour is really, really relevant to this test. Good luck to you. Study hard, check your notes, email me, contact me if you have more questions.